21-year-old Stephen Tootzel from Scone and his 22-year-old mate Anthony Griffiths from Berkeley Vale appeared in Newcastle Court this morning, charged with possessing a prohibited weapon. The weapon, this plastic toy, a replica 9mm calibre Walther self-loading pistol. The court heard that the replica was a prop for a fancy dress party, a cheap toy which could have cost the two their lives.
Pretty close. You know, as soon as I got a good view of the weapon, it was plastic and the situation quelled. But if it was darker, this was the afternoon, if it was darker it could have been a lot worse.
The court heard the pair were simply skylarking, waving the toy out their car window. What they didn't realise is that constitutes assault.
The way they used it, they were two grown men, they were pointing it at people in the street. The people perceived it as a real weapon.
Both men looked nervous throughout the hearing. The two were found guilty. Magistrate Col Elliott placed Tootzel on an 18-month good behaviour bond. Griffiths was fined a total of $400. The plastic pistol will be destroyed. Anthony Griffiths, NBN News.
The bridesmaid again, not quite the bride. Kate Walker muses as she works on her latest manuscript. Recognition as a writer doesn't come easily, a fact Kate, after 15 years in the business, knows only too well. Her latest novel, Peter, came in third in today's Children's Book of the Year Awards.
Writers live with divine discontent. You know, first of all, we want just to write the book, and then when we've written it, well, we just want to get it published, and then when we're published, you know, we just want to figure in awards. So, yeah, there's always that carrot, always out of reach, but it's a nice way to operate, yeah.
Now, with 11 published titles to her name and 3 national awards, Kate is starting to enjoy the fruits of her labour. Peter is the story of a teenage boy who likes knocking about the bush on a trail bike, but also discovers he's attracted to other boys and must come to terms with his sexuality.
It's a bit of a hot potato, and there was a lot of good books out there this year, and I thought, well, you know, they've got plenty of excuses for simply overlooking it, and they didn't. And then, you know, blow me down, they went and honour listed it. It was the last thing I expected.
The substance was noticed pouring into Throsby Creek shortly after 11 o'clock this morning. A boom was laid around the outlet pipe to catch the fuel as it entered the waterway. The Water Corporation's emergency response team checked drains leading to the pipe but found nothing. It's thought someone probably dumped a drum of marine fuel down one of the drains. If the spill is found to be minor, the oil trapped in the boom will be allowed to disperse naturally.
About 20 federal, state, local and community leaders met at City Hall with an ultimatum from State Planning Minister Webster. If the rail line stays through to Newcastle, the $71 million in funding goes to Sydney. It was a heated debate, with the media told to keep out. Lord Mayor John McNaughton had earlier had discussions with the Planning Minister in Sydney. The loss of honeysuckle would mean the loss of 18,000 jobs over a 20-year period, the boost the city needed in a revitalisation plan. Despite public commitments by local Labor politicians to maintain the rail link through to Newcastle, tonight there was a dramatic change of position.
So you've agreed to Mr Webster's demands?
No, we've agreed that they have the right to make those decisions, and we agree to his capacity to do that.
But honeysuckle is far from saved. Tonight's decision only means a in Macquarie Street.
Quite a chill whistled across the harbour waters to remind the almost 1,500 runners of the task ahead. A 10-kilometre hike around the foreshore, up through the daunting King Edward Park, out to Wickham and back to Nobbies. A good clean start had the favoured runners in the leading bunch and keyed up for an assault on the demanding but quick course. Almost immediately, John Andrews opened up quite a gap on Steve Atkins, with the experienced campaigner Brian Morgan heading a group of athletes hell-bent on mowing down the leaders. Andrews continued to set an unbelievable pace, showing that a trip to Europe, which was fraught with disappointment, did have some benefits, and he made mincemeat of the sapping climb through King Edward Park. While Andrews and the rest powered away, hundreds struggled to come to grips with the steep hill, oblivious through pain of the sensational view behind them. At the 6k mark, Andrews led Morgan by a mammoth 55 seconds and rounded the top mark for the journey home. And it was his foes who cheered him on. 30 minutes and 14 seconds after setting out, John Andrews was home, with Brian Morgan 1.5 minutes behind. Joanne Debman was the first female home in the credible time of 36:50. Forty students from Woolgoolga, Benalbo and Richmond River High Schools gathered at Lennox Head this weekend for some expert coaching tips. Early next month they'll be helping local primary schoolers develop their skills in a number of modified Aussie sports. Today's clinic focused on modified league, basketball, hockey and netball. These students will spend 16 weeks in terms 3 and 4 using their newfound coaching skills to help children not already involved in community sport. At Scott's Head, just south of Coffs Harbour, the North Coast Zone individual surfing titles with a surf a bit on the small side. And it was the Central Coast who cleaned up. Rod Baldwin winning the seniors, Barry McGuigan the legends, Baden Smith and Danny Bond the kneeboards and the grandmasters respectively. Newcastle was successful in the Masters with Greg Ancliffe, and Mitch Dawkins took out the Open division.
"80 exhibitors packed into the Civic Centre for the 3-day craft expose. They came from nearby towns and far-flung places, from Sydney to Tamworth and Brisbane to Byron Bay. Displays ranged from pottery to crocheted creations and wood-turned wonders to precious porcelain. Keen craft fans could also get a close look at skills like lace-making and calligraphy. In its first year, the Craftorama raised $400 for charity. Last year, it raised $18,000. It's hoped this year's exhibition will equal that figure, with the money going towards a hostel for country cancer patients at Sydney's Royal North Shore Hospital. At Ballina, some keen young cyclists braved rather inclement weather to get a few tips from the police and SES about bike safety. Aged from 5 up, they brushed up on their road rules and had their bikes and accessories checked over. Although the weather dampened this year's outing, enthusiasm wasn't lacking, and organisers say it's likely to become an annual event. The only change, it'll be staged at a warmer time of year. At about 6:15 last night, 2 armed men walked into the TAB and held up the owner.
They went to the counter where the proprietor was alone. They used some sort of weapon which we're not aware of at this stage, and they demanded all the money, which the takings from the day's betting. The proprietor handed over a large sum of money. The 2 offenders placed it in a bag and they left the premises on the last seen heading west in Beauty Street, Armidale.
Police believe the pair had been watching the TAB for some time.
There was no one else in the premises when they actually entered. Only the proprietor himself was there, so that obviously we can only assume that they had the premises under surveillance.
The first offender is described as 173 centimetres tall, of slim build, wearing a dark balaclava and a blue and black checked lumberjacket, green tracksuit pants and red socks. The second offender is described as 173 centimetres tall, of slim build, wearing a light-coloured balaclava and 3/4-length beige jacket. Members of the public who think they can help investigations are asked to contact Armidale Police.
First played in 1985, the annual under-23 Colts battle between the fierce interstate rivals has produced excellent golf, and this year it was no exception at the Great Lakes Country Club course at Tuncurry. 6 players represented each state, and yesterday New South Wales had their nose in front, winning the foursomes 2.5 matches to a half. But the Maroons hit back in today's singles, belting the Blues 4.5 matches to 1.5, and snare only their second victory in the history of the event. At Maxville, the pace was a bit quicker but fairly demanding. The 21st Maxville Marathon attracted 12 runners for the full distance and 21 runners in the half marathon. And it was former winner Greg Love who never gave the others a look in. Love bolted away with the event to win in a time of 2 hours 45.49 minutes, a whopping 16 minutes in front of Jim Bennington.
This small classroom is what's called a transitional facility, a room where preschoolers are prepared for kindergarten in schools outside the Aboriginal community.
It's a facility aimed at providing that extra boost for children moving from the preschool environment to the mainstream school in town.
It bridges our gap, the gap between the cultures, and brings all the children a lot closer together.
To help them face mainstream school, the children are taught a wide range of subjects.
We teach them to be self-reliant. We do a lot of work in Aboriginal culture, a lot of art and music, as well as covering the basic subjects and basic literacy skills.
It's a facility the Archibald Centre community didn't expect for some time, but that didn't affect enthusiasm at today's official opening. Armidale Mayor Rosemary Leach today hailed the classroom as another step toward achieving racial harmony in Australia.
I believe our future is to work together, to take the best from both cultures and to learn to marry those and to go forward as one nation into the next century.
Arbor Day was first celebrated in Australia in 1889, after being gazetted 4 years earlier as the National Tree Planting Day. The tradition continues in Armidale, with the Director-General of Education, Dr Ken Boston, making his mark with a snow gum. Impressed with the standard of education in the Northwest, Dr Boston launched the booklet Northwest Register of Environmental Activities. The resource has been put together by area students.
I think bears upon the whole question of human ecology, of man in environment, and the importance of environmental issues.
Dr Boston sees the secret to successful education as being cooperation between the community and the school, believing the school council plays a vital role.
The purpose of a school council is to link the school to its community, to articulate the needs and aspirations of the community, and to have community input into what the school is doing and how it's going about its business.
Van der Voort was involved in more than the one incident in the bruising encounter. A tackle on Paul Markwood in the first half, questionable. And later in the second half was cautioned and reported for a high shot on Adrian Brunker. But the Knights were angered over this hit on Brad Godden 6 minutes into the second half and asked John Quayle to take a closer look. Van der Voort will face the League Judiciary tomorrow night at 6 p.m. The League will take no further action on the tackle on Brunker.
Retail Operations is the course aimed at 16 to 19-year-olds. It's an Australia-wide scheme funded by federal and state governments, with some of the money dedicated to paying 25% of the trainee's wage. During the year-long traineeship, recruits work 3 days a week. The remaining 2 they study at TAFE, learning skills like selling techniques and merchandising. Murray Brown has employed 2 trainees and believes the course is a step in the right direction.
No one wants to employ people without experience, and in this way young people are getting a chance to get some experience for later employment.
The course presents hope for Shane Winter, who, after completing his HSC last year and not wanting to go to university, joined the jobless queues.
Before, it was just a nightmare just trying to get a job, because it's just all this casual jobs everywhere, but nothing permanent. You have to have something to stand on, and if you've got experience in the field, that's what really counts.
The course has been operating for 3 years in Newcastle, and according to coordinator Jean McGarry, this year around 90% of trainees gained full-time employment at the end of the course. But according to Mr Brown, the Keating government's focus on job training initiatives has a potential shortfall.
Some employers may decide not to continue employment of the people after the 12-month traineeship.
He adds, without an expansion of the economy to create more jobs and therefore absorb the newly trained, their future may be back on the jobless queues.
Lord Mayor John McNaughton had gained a second wind this afternoon, all that step-bounding energy due to excitement after learning that honeysuckle is back in the mines of Macquarie Street. Earlier, the Lord Mayor had talked by phone with Planning Minister Robert Webster.
Well, he said that the response from Newcastle was tremendous, was the word he used. He's now satisfied that we are keenly interested in getting on with the job, and he's undertaken to do what he said he'd do, and that's take it back to Treasury, and if he gets a response, satisfactory response, then he'll take it to Cabinet.
Less than 2 weeks ago, Mr Webster announced Newcastle's redevelopment project had been scrubbed from the state's submission list for federal funding because of what he called the ALP's petty political games over ending the rail line at the Civic. But Newcastle Council and local MPs prompted a rethink for the Fay government by saying they accepted the state's right to make the rail cut. But even after this latest turnaround, Honeysuckle may still not end up with the $71 million earmarked for the development.
There can be no guarantees about that, but at least it's something's happening about it. Until now, nothing was happening. It was simply off the agenda.
Earlier this year, the state government proposed building a detention centre on this public works site opposite a high school at Wallsend in Newcastle's west. It stirred controversy, and during a visit to Wallsend Court, angry residents expressed their feelings to the minister and his representatives. Mr Griffiths says there's a degree of misunderstanding within the community about the function of a weekend low security detention centre.
The people that we're incarcerating on Saturday and Sunday in a periodic detention centre, Monday to Friday, are living next door to the people, are working in the community Monday to Friday.
The state government's development application is display, and within weeks Newcastle City Council is expected to decide on whether or not to approve the project. Mr Griffiths says he'll accept whatever decision Council makes, but believes if refused, the community stands to lose.
Once you open a periodic detention centre such as here, then we'll be looking for local recruiting. I believe the economic benefits to Wallsend community could be quite enormous.
Later today, the Minister also opened a new community corrections centre to service Lake Macquarie. Staff at the centre help supervise people on parole and prepare pre-sentence reports for the courts. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
It's up there with the city's high points, a row of cabin windows and lifeboats looking over the calm harbour and traffic below. The able Tasman would usually be plying the southern waters of Bass Strait between Melbourne and Devonport at this time of year, but the ship has made a detour for its regular maintenance schedule. Undergoing propeller repairs and a paint job, the ship may soon be bound for new owners in foreign seas.
This, we think, will be her last dry dock voyage. We're planning to replace it with a much larger and more modern ship, the Peter Pan, at the end of next year.
The tourist and freight run to Tassie has picked up and a larger ship is now required. The increasing yen by many for a sea voyage is so great that the Tasmanian Transport Line offers a special run for southerners to steam up the coast when the ship is delivered for docking. 700 people took up the offer, disembarking in Newcastle on Monday.
It only happens every 2 years, and a lot of Tasmanians and some Victorians take advantage of that, a little mini cruise, and of course we put on a special performance for them at the same time.
It's a success story in the midst of tough times. Tetron's workforce and workload have been buoyed with a 4-year contract to overhaul power plants from the Navy's 25 Fremantle-class patrol boats, stationed around the country, the far north and the Pacific. The boats use the 500-horsepower V8 Dorman engines to drive onboard generators. Once freighted to Newcastle, they're overhauled by Tetron, whose engineers must then accompany them back to the vessel for installation and start-up. All work is carried out to strict Defence Force requirements.
The only way that anybody can survive in business today is to cut prices and also have very high quality.
A quality of work that has also won Tetron the job of grinding the patrol boats' crankshafts, which used to be sent to Germany. Employing more than 100 people, diversity has been the key to the locally owned company's success, working on everything from lawnmower motors to XPTs, FA-18s and Leopard tanks.
Chasing Defence Force work and National Rail work is the way we've survived through these economic times.
At Hawkins Oval this afternoon, St Francis got the jump on Warners Bay right from the start and was never headed. St Francis generated drive from utility player David Sokolski, who had great support from Stephen Soteropoulos. Captain Liam Baker did some very handy tidying up work at full forward, bagging 5 of his team's 14 goals. For Warners Bay, ruckman Scott McGregor tried hard all day, but the soccer background of many of the players showed through, with far too much ineffective kicking off the ground. Final score, St Francis Xavier 14-10-94 to Warners Bay 2-6-18. They'll now play North Coast side Woolgoolga in the next stage of the Lions Cup in Wauchope next week. The final of the competition will be played at the Sydney Cricket Ground on the 28th of August as a curtain raiser to the AFL match between the Swans and Richmond.
.26-year-old Eddie Smith thought he was only a slim chance of making the Australian Aboriginal squad. The Newcastle West's 5'8" was one of only 6 New South Welshmen picked in the team. The bulk come from Queensland. Former Brisbane star Colin Scott could well be named coach of the South Pacific Cup team, but Newcastle's Victor Wright is also laying claims.
We are both in the race for it. I hope that my experience and my background over the past 29 years as a been a player coach might grab that spot. Yeah.
He's a bloke who's coached a lot of teams, had a lot of success with him.
12 South Pacific nations, including Papua New Guinea, Fiji and Western Samoa, will descend on Auckland in October. The huge Samoans are the big worry, but Eddie's quietly confident.
I reckon we have a good chance of shaking it, giving it a good go.
Let the ball do the work, and then they've got to catch us.
Bishop Holland and wife Joy are counting down their final days in Newcastle after 14 years in the city. They'll soon be leaving for a 12-month teaching stint in Jerusalem before retiring in Canberra. As the spiritual leader of the Anglican diocese, the bishop has fought some fierce battles for the underprivileged, a cause close to his working-class origins in England.
I think my background made me very aware of society and the matters of social justice. And whenever there appears to be an injustice in society, I have felt that the Church ought to recognise it and say something about it.
The bishop is outspoken on the rights for women to join the priesthood, losing favour with the conservative sector of the Church. He's critical of the lack of funding for the aged, children and unemployed. The bishop says the growing numbers of people out of work is a tragedy the entire community must confront.
And I think people have got to talk about that and not write them off as no-hopers, but to realise that some of them that want work and can't get it.
But it's not all hard slog for Bishop Holland, a keen rugby player in his younger days. His weekends aren't entirely dominated by the church. He's the patron of the Mayfield East Rugby Club and an avid fan of the Newcastle Knights.
When we were making an application to Sydney to be part of the Sydney League, I wrote a commendatory letter. I think this year we got a good chance, and I'm barracking for them all the way. When I get to Canberra, I may have to change shirts, but who knows.
The bishop's tip for the weekend, Knights to get up over Cronulla. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
In these economic times, it's hard to bite the bullet and enter into a new business, but Tony Kemp for the past 4 years, all his football earnings have gone to repay a mammoth $70,000 New Zealand legal bill, which he incurred in 1989 in winning the right to play for the Knights in the Winfield Cup.
If you've been thinking that your money hasn't got much bounce to it lately, you're probably right. Spending power aside, banks now want to flatten the new plastic notes before stacking them. The 5s and 10s already in use have become a cash handler's nightmare, retaining creases and crumples. It's a problem Peter Sykes set out to rectify after seeing his bank manager fidgeting with the 5s.
While he was counting it, he just made the comment that he would not blame his staff if he went on strike over these plastic notes.
The outcome was a plastic spring-loaded cash tray that flattens out the money. Rubber bands are also out, replaced by paper bands that wrap around the wads. The tray systems are produced in a plastic injection mould at specialised component industries at Rathmines. Australia's Reserve Bank caught on to the idea and sent Peter on a national field trip of banking institutions, many of which are adopting the system. Australia has patented the plastic money design, which will soon replace the older notes here. It's hoped the idea, along with the stacking system, can be sold to overseas customers.
By the time the 5 notes are in, we're talking about 20 million packets a year. So the whole enterprise will be a multi-million-dollar enterprise, yes.
It's already being recognised overseas.
When he saw the wreckage littering the highway, one of the first police officers to arrive at the scene asked how many dead. Remarkably, seriously injured in spite of the devastating impact. Even the passenger in this Commodore escaped with minor injuries. Bulahdelah Rescue Squad workers referred to the crash as another Friday special. This time it appears the northbound Commodore on a 3-lane stretch of highway at Waterholes Gap collided with 2 southbound vehicles, coincidentally both Mazdas. 2 men and 1 woman were taken by road ambulance to the John Hunter Hospital, but the male driver of this car was trapped for almost 30 minutes until freed by the Bulahdelah Volunteer Rescue Squad. Paramedics flown to the scene by the Westpac chopper treated him for a gashed head and a broken arm. His ordeal then made easier by a quick flight to hospital. Police inquiries into the accident are continuing. Jim Sullivan, NBN News.
24 enthusiasts from Lismore, Coffs Harbour and the Gold Coast turned out to air their radio-controlled planes. There were World War I and II fighters, Tiger Moths, even an F-16. The largest plane with a 3-metre wingspan came complete with model pilot. Although mainly a fun day, there were some prizes at stake, including the best static model and the most realistic flight.
The Bank tournament has attracted players from as far away as Western Australia, as well as a strong contingent from Sydney and also north of the border. In today's women's first round, Newcastle's Kylie Hunt, one of the favoured competitors, was too strong for her opponent Jenny Lucas. Hunt raced through the first set 6-2 and continued her brilliant form to snatch the second 6-1 and the match in straight sets. Chris Reardon is only a youngster but has strong claims to both the junior and open titles. But in this morning's encounter with Brisbane's Nathaniel Train, Reardon struggled. He dropped the first set 6-1 before he got his act together to take the next 2 sets and the match 6-4, 7-5. Nine to 4 on and favourite, 33 to 1 and 30 to 1. At Sandown, the Moondar played over 1,200 metres and a brilliant performance by Ivory Way in her return to racing. Six to 1, the unplaced favourite at 11 to 4, Prince Salieri.
It's the third Rotary romp and they're driving to raise around $60,000 for the Central Coast Life Education Centre. 20-year-old cars are preferred with 1 or 2 late model ring-ins and a few four-wheel drive support vehicles for good measure. They're headed way out west through Tibooburra, Mount Isa and Longreach, on to Carnarvon, then Harvey Bay and back down the Gold Coast. It's a 2-week trip on and off the beaten tracks, sleeping under the stars and the occasional motel stop.
Four-year-old Tavanti Piras is one of the youngest on the missing persons file. Police say he was only 2 years old when his mother, a Thai national, defied a custody order, taking him from his father's home in the Sydney suburb of Castle Hill.
We had good information to suggest the kid did attend a childcare centre up here at Newcastle, and we made a few inquiries and, apparently the kid had left prior to our arrival.
It's believed the boy attended the Awabakal Childcare Centre at Wickham until July last year.